Hello and welcome to Whispered Legends. I am your storyteller, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Get ready to journey into tales of mystery, adventure, and the unknown. If you love stories that spark your imagination, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a whisper. Now, let's begin today's tale. Lily moved to the quiet town of Halston, hoping to start fresh after the loss of her mother. The house she inherited was old and slightly run down, but it felt like home. At night, though, it was different. The house seemed alive, the silence oppressive. But it was the phone calls that truly disturbed her. At first, they were just eerie. Every night, at exactly midnight, Lily's landline would ring. The caller never spoke at first, just heavy breathing that felt like someone was standing right behind her. Then, a voice would break the silence, calm and almost soothing, as if it were familiar, but she couldn't place it. "How was your day today, Lily? I saw you at the cafe. You looked lovely in that blue dress." Shivers ran down her spine. She didn't remember anyone from the cafe looking at her like that. She would hang up, her hands trembling, convinced it was some sick prank. But the calls continued. Each night, the voice grew more intimate, more knowing. It mentioned details only someone close to her could have known, how her mother used to tuck her in as a child, the scent of lavender that always reminded her of home. Then, it started mentioning darker, more disturbing things she had kept buried deep in her mind. "Remember when you locked your sister out of the house after she hurt you? How you watched her cry, but didn't let her in?" Lily froze. No one could have known about that night, the night her sister had been locked out, screaming in the cold, desperate to be let back in. Lily had done nothing. It was a memory she had tried to forget. The calls continued, night after night, growing darker. "You can't run from your past, Lily," the voice would whisper. "I know all of your secrets. I've seen you." One night, as she picked up the phone, the voice was different. This time, it was colder, almost mocking. "You think you're safe, don't you? I've been watching you for a long time. Long before you ever moved to Halston." Lily felt her stomach churn. She rushed to the windows, checking the empty street below, but nothing was there. The house felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on her. She turned to her mother's old bookshelf, scanning the titles, trying to focus on something familiar. And then, she noticed something strange. One of the books had been moved. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for the book, pulling it off the shelf. A small piece of paper fell out, covered in handwritten notes. They were cryptic, almost nonsensical, except for one chilling sentence written at the very end. "The call is coming from inside the house." Lily's heart raced. She turned toward the stairs. The house seemed too quiet, too still. She grabbed the phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911, but before she could hit call, the phone rang again. It was midnight. The voice on the other end was barely a whisper. "I'm in your house, Lily. I've been here all along. Watching. Waiting." Lily dropped the phone, her eyes wide with terror. She ran upstairs, checking every closet, every room. But there was no one. Yet, as she passed her mother's bedroom, she heard a faint noise, something like a whisper. She pushed the door open slowly, her hand trembling on the doorknob. Inside, the room was empty, save for an old rocking chair that creaked by itself. But when she stepped inside, her foot caught on something. She looked down. There, in the corner of the room, was a small, dusty box. The box was locked, but Lily knew it belonged to her mother. She hadn't seen it in years. Trembling, she opened it. Inside was an old photograph of her as a child, and beneath it, a note that sent ice through her veins. "You can't escape. You never have." Suddenly, the phone rang again, and the voice on the other end laughed softly. "I've been in your house longer than you think, Lily. I'm already here, waiting. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. Lily spun around, her mind racing, but there was no one. Just the soft sound of breathing that wasn't hers. Then, she saw it, a shadow in the corner of the room, faint but unmistakable. It was her reflection in the mirror, but it wasn't quite right. The reflection grinned, and then, Lily realized the horrible truth: it wasn't her reflection at all. It was someone, or something, else. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. The whispers grew louder, echoing in the room, mocking her. You thought you could run, Lily. You can never outrun what's inside you. The last thing Lily saw before everything went black was the dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. The voice on the phone whispered one final time, but this time, it wasn't just a voice, it was inside her head. It's too late, Lily. I've been with you all along. Lily stood frozen in the pitch-black room, unable to tear her eyes away from the dark figure at the foot of her bed. The air felt heavy, thick with a malevolent presence. The soft, almost comforting whisper of the voice on the phone had been replaced by a cold, distorted laughter that reverberated through her skull. You thought you could escape, didn't you? It was never about the phone calls. It was always about you, Lily. The figure didn't move, but its presence grew more suffocating with every passing second. The shadows around her seemed to bleed into one another, stretching and distorting in unnatural ways. Lily tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out everything except the haunting sound of her own breath. She backed away slowly, her mind screaming at her to run, but the room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. With every step, the laughter grew louder. It was as if the very house was alive, its walls pulsing with malevolent energy. The phone, still lying on the floor where she'd dropped it, began to ring again, sending a jolt of terror through her chest. Lily's hand shot to her mouth to stifle a cry. It's not over. It never will be. She turned away from the figure and ran toward the door, but as her hand gripped the handle, it twisted by itself, pulling the door shut with a force that rattled the walls. She spun around to face the room again, her breath shallow and panicked. "No!" she screamed, her voice finally breaking through the terror. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, its shape becoming clearer in the dark, but still indistinct. Its outline flickered, as though it were made of shadow itself, constantly shifting, never still. The voice came again, this time a low growl, reverberating from all around her, not just the phone. "I want you to understand, Lily. This has always been your fault. You buried me, but I've always been here. Inside you." Lily's chest tightened. Memories flooded her mind, memories she had tried desperately to forget. The night her sister had come to her with a secret, begging for help. The fight that followed. Her harsh words, the cruelty in her heart as she locked her sister outside, leaving her alone in the cold, terrified, screaming for forgiveness. The guilt she had buried deep inside her, those moments had festered into something far darker. "I didn't mean to. Lily whispered, but the voice silenced her. "No, you didn't. But you did it anyway. And now you will pay for it. Just like all the others who have buried their sins." The shadows around her twisted violently, and the figure lunged, faster than she could react. Her vision blurred as she was thrown backward into the wall. The air turned freezing, her body going numb. The voice in her mind was deafening now, a cacophony of whispers. "I've been waiting for you to remember, Lily. Waiting for the truth to destroy you." Lily's knees buckled as she collapsed to the floor. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. She reached out blindly, her hands landing on the photograph from her mother's bookshelf. She gasped as the image of her younger self stared back at her, innocent, naive, but also, different. The reflection in the photo flickered, changing for a brief moment, and in that split second, Lily saw the truth. The figure standing at the foot of the bed was her own reflection, twisted and broken, its eyes hollow, empty sockets staring back at her. The voice was no longer coming from the phone. It was inside her head, feeding on her darkest secrets, her deepest guilt. It was the manifestation of everything she had repressed, every lie, every sin. "You were never meant to survive, Lily," the reflection whispered. "You're just like me now." A sudden jolt of fear forced Lily to her feet, and in a burst of adrenaline, she ran toward the door, yanking it open with a force she didn't know she had. But what she saw on the other side froze her in place. The hallway was endless, stretching into darkness, and at the far end, a shadow stood. It was the same shape, the same twisted figure, but this time, it wasn't a trick of the light. It was her, in the flesh, a twisted version of herself, smiling with a grotesque grin. The reflection in the hallway beckoned her forward. "Come, Lily. You can't outrun me. I've always been you." The hallway stretched farther, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker. The figure reached out for her, and the phone on the floor began ringing once more. The call was coming from inside her head now. She screamed, but the world around her began to blur and fade, the room distorting into darkness as the last of her sanity cracked under the weight of her past. The entity Lily has been tormented by is revealed to be an embodiment of her own guilt, haunting her and feeding on her darkest secrets. The psychological horror intensifies as the line between reality and her inner demons blurs, and she's faced with the horrifying realization that she can never escape what she has done. The house, the calls, and the dark figure all become manifestations of the past she can never outrun, and in the end, it consumes her.